background for and education for adults. Our speaker today probably doesn't need any introduction to any of the people in the church building right now, but for those people who are watching us online or in the future, I would like to introduce Jayce Keeling. Is a former educator, a facilitator of personal growth and self-discovery groups, a contemplative group, and a wonderful group leader, and a wonderful participant in Covenant Church. She will be addressing us about the certain comfort that she gets, the assurance that her life is part of a natural cycle of life and death, and that it is apparent in all of God's creation. She's got a growing appreciation for creation care and has become aware of environmental damage caused by traditional methods of burial and cremation. She would like to share her evolution of her thoughts regarding burial and cremation and some of what she's learned that is described as green or natural burial. So without further ado, I invite, please, Jayce Keeling.
Thank you, Mary Jo. And thank all of you for attending. Marty gave an estimate of fewer people than I'm seeing out there. He just wanted me not to have my expectations too high, I guess. So appreciate your being here. So I'm going to start out by giving a brief description of my own journey. What a perfect sermon lead up we had, because this is my journey and reckoning with aging and dying. Talk about change, and whether we like it or not, aging certainly would qualify there. So I'm going to be sharing with you my viewpoint, which is a viewpoint of someone in her 70s. Some of you are much younger, I know. So what I have to say will be processed differently in your minds than it will be for people who are closer to my age. It might be like, I'm speaking to you from the end of a long, well, not the end, but from down a long hallway, which you have yet to traverse. So you can just take whatever information is helpful to you and file it away in the someday box. So as I kind of already mentioned, something has befallen me. I admit it was expected, and yet somehow it has surprised the heck out of me. It's this: I've become old. The other day, I overheard Marty speaking to someone on the phone and telling them, my wife and I are nearing our 80s. My inner immediate response was, what? Who is this wife person he's talking about? But he was telling the truth. 80 will be coming up in the next few years. And hurrah for that. So life unfolds, and it's kind of like, there's this, and then this, and then this, and we're always holding the expectation of the next thing. The next thing that is upon me currently is that I'm old, and I will be getting older until I don't anymore. In the meantime, other things continue to happen, but the ultimate and inevitable big thing, the next big thing, is looming. It's this: at some point, for sure, I will die. I will no longer exist in this body, this place, in this time as we know it. The growing knowledge and acceptance of this reality leads to a variety of responses from us. Some of us embark on gathering and recording memories, sifting through old photos, seeking to renew relationships from the past. I've been doing all of that. Some rush to complete a bucket list. For others, there is a renewed and fervent cherishing of loved ones, or just of our simple, beautiful lives, cherishing them. Those who know me well know that I have long been willing, even eager at times, to accept and grapple with both my own death and with death as a larger existential crux of the matter, of what it means to be alive on this beautiful earth, what it means in the context of the fact that this life will end. So I'm going to give you a little more personal story. It was my mother's death when she was 56 and I was 36 that jolted me into an awareness that death was a reality, even for me and for those I loved. Prior to that, my attitude about death was, I think, not uncommon. I recognized that death was real, but somehow I didn't believe it would happen to me. I would magically escape it. But having my relatively young and vibrant mom die really set me back. I embarked on a quest to understand as much as possible death and grief. I even shaped my master's degree around good children's literature that deals with death. I began to notice how death and rebirth and resurrection is apparent all around me, that everything dies. I gradually came to embrace it, even as at times I still feared it. Knowing that it will end, that this earthly life is not infinite, makes life and living so ineffably sweet. So there's the thinking about death and the gradually coming to terms with the reality of it, such as I've described, and that it's not just for other people. Accepting that truth is an enormous step in the journey, and we each come to it in our own way and our own time. Probably many of you weren't nearly such laggards in the acceptance as I was or have been. But I will say also that paradoxically, acceptance is very freeing. To accept rather than deny death removes all the defenses and inner barricades that we've had to put up in order to avoid its inevitability. This acceptance humbles us and it frees us. Kathleen Dowling Singh says that we should meditate on our deaths every day, not so that we'll be morbid and dour, but so that we can claim life fully while we have it. Once we've come to this place of accepting death's reality for our own selves, there are, when we're ready, very concrete and practical matters to consider. And those matters are my second topic. When we die, how do we want our bodies disposed of? And what arrangements do we want regarding a marking of our passage? Now, I've learned through a lot of research that a small percentage of people actually plan their final arrangements when they're in their 30s. But most people don't do it even as they approach their 70s and 80s. And yet, and any of you who have gone through the arrangements for the funeral of a loved one, the disposal of the body, you know that it's so helpful for loved ones at the time of a death if they don't have to figure out all the arrangements while they're grieving. It can be very exhausting and perplexing if arrangements haven't been made. So here's a quote I found because, you know, it's kind of interesting. Why does it take some of us so long to go ahead and make those arrangements? And this is a quote I found that I thought kind of speaks to that. So slide 1. That's not 1, no. There we go. Yes, being prepared doesn't mean that you will pass anytime soon. I thought, well, that's a really good thing to remember. Go ahead and make the preparations. It doesn't mean you're making your death come any closer than it was going to anyway. So then I wanted to share with you. So for whatever reason, I need to tell you first, I've been the one in the marriage, some might say the nag, to suggest that we should move ahead with a variety of things, but in particular today, move ahead on this planning. So here's a Pickles cartoon that I saw that speaks to the dynamic, and that's the slide 2. So she says, maybe Sylvia, that's our daughter, maybe Sylvia, right, maybe we should think about making our final arrangements. You know, decide what we want done with our earthly remains when we're gone. I'm leaving that up to you, he says. Why me? You've done such a good job of picking up after me all these years. I think you should finish the job. And actually, Marty's been much more ready to discuss these things with me than that. But okay, so for 7 or 8 years, Marty and we have had an excellent workbook that takes us through all aspects of final arrangements and wishes. We probably had it for a long, I think at least 7 or 8 years. We've hardly cracked it open. It's always been something we get around to eventually. We had, however, been for some time in agreement that we want to be cremated. Cremation seems tidy, confined, the remains are portable, and there's the option of scattering them or letting loved ones do that when they wish, with them what they wish. All of our deceased parents have been cremated. And here's some more information I recently found out. For several years, the state of Washington had the highest percentage of cremations in the country. Currently, we rank 3rd behind Colorado and Oregon. Isn't this really interesting? But I thought so. We have, with 79% of the deceased being cremated in Washington, the national percentage is between 45 and 55% and is rising. So we were among those who we intended to be cremated, and we wished to be, and we had not yet talked about it with our children, nor had we made any of the arrangements. But then during contemplation one day, about a year ago, a very strong feeling welled up in me that upon my death, I wanted to be part of the earth. Dust to dust. I must say this really surprised me, but it felt overwhelmingly true. And so I embarked on finding out what I could about natural or green burials. While I was feeling this deep desire to have my body be laid into the earth following my death, I knew for sure that I didn't want to be buried in the traditional way in a casket, and separated from the earth in that way. So, several years previously, I'd read about what was described as natural or green burials, and that had appealed to me at the time, but I hadn't given it more thought because it seemed far off in the future. Now, after my contemplative experience, I became intent on learning more. So here are some things I discovered. Western Washington, at this time, about a year ago, when I began to look into this, had 4 green burial sites in Western Washington. 4 green burial sites exist. But in Eastern Washington, there was only 1 green burial site available. It's called White Eagle. It's part of a large conservation area. It's one of only 9 of these green burial sites in conservation areas in the whole country. And it's near Goldendale. So let's see slide number 3. It's a beautiful location. Their website describes very thoughtful burial processes, options for family members, care of the land. However, and you can see the preserve there, and then you can see, to me, this is really beautiful, how a grave is prepared. They're hand dug, and wildflowers, native flowers often put into them. So, but it's 240 miles from Spokane. Sometimes, this was interesting to read, it's inaccessible in winter months because they don't maintain much of a road. They're trying to keep this true conservation area. So this sounded like maybe it wasn't going to be an option. So I began looking further into what might be possible. And my next thought was of the lovely, sweet little Dartford Cemetery, just a short way from the Little Spokane River. Maybe many of you have noticed it. It's on Dartford Road at the base of a big hill before you start climbing up. Let's see slide number 4. This is Dartford. I've passed it regularly for years because I often would drive up to Cairo's House of Prayer, which was on up that road, and which was a very significant place in my faith journey. So I thought, wouldn't it be great to be buried off of Dartford and on the way up to Kairos? This seemed really good. So, but I didn't even know if it still was open and had room for more burials. Then I learned from Sherry, my good friend, that her husband, Joe Troy, was buried there in 2017. So I began to look more into this. As you can see, it's very rustic. To me, it looks quite natural as it is compared to some of the green lawns of cemeteries we're more accustomed to seeing. The care and maintenance is done by the members. Sherry is on the cemetery board, so she could be a really good resource for you. I wanted to know if there could be natural burials there, green burials. And so she referred me to the chairman of the board, and who was very helpful. But one of the first things I learned from her was that you have to have, that they hadn't had a place for natural burials and that they would look into that. But to be buried there now, you had to have a vault, a cement vault, which was news to me. I didn't know about these. And the vault's purposes, and they are not legally required. There is no law requiring a cement vault or a vault, but almost all cemeteries do require them because, for one thing, they keep the earth from sinking in around the casket. And so for the maintenance, for the machinery that needs to drive around and keep things, sometimes because they're going to dig a new grave, and certainly for lawn care and all of that, they don't want all these bumpy, hillocky situations in the cemetery. So you have to have a vault. So I'm going to be explaining more to you about the effects of these vaults on the environment. But what was apparent to me right away was that I didn't want a vault because then the body would not be being buried in the earth, it would be being buried in cement. So I presented all of my reasoning and examples of other natural burial places in the state to the chair of the cemetery board. And the Dartford groundskeeper actually did a lot of research and kind of found an area he thought might work for natural burials. But in the end, the board denied my request, and I really understand why. This would be quite a new thing for them to try to do. I may go back and speak to them again about it. Okay, so now what I want to do is share with you some facts about the environmental impacts of traditional burial and cremation. Traditional burial, pesticides and herbicides are used on those beautiful green lawns to keep them in pristine condition. Here was the thing that I had no idea. This really blew my mind. So the cement vault, the cement is 15% concrete. That's how cement is made. The amount of cement that goes into one of these vaults releases a ton of CO2 into the atmosphere, mostly through the creation of the cement, of the concrete, but also the transporting of it to wherever you're being buried. On a global scale, concrete production accounts for 5 to 10% of the total world carbon footprint. If it were a nation, it would be third only behind China and the US as far as global pollution, the making of concrete. Okay, so there's that. There's also the embalming fluids, and that's only if the person wished to be embalmed or the family wanted that, and it's certainly understandable in some cases. If they want to be able to have a viewing, or it just feels important to have the person look natural. But embalming fluid is very toxic, and the embalmers themselves have a high rate of various cancers, even though they ventilate very well where they do it. And then, of course, if a body is embalmed and if there is any eventual leakage of fluids into the ground, then it's in our ground. Now, I did discover that there are plastic vaults, and those at the most release 500 pounds of CO2. And then there's also the steel casket if you're having a traditional burial. And the creation of that releases 600 pounds of carbon dioxide. And it takes a tree about 40 years to absorb 1 ton of CO2, because that was one of the suggestions. People can have a tree planted and that will make up for all of the CO2 that gets released, but it takes a long time. Now, cremation releases 534 pounds of carbon dioxide, and it's mostly created by the fuel. They usually use natural gas, a small amount from the body. And that 534 is an average. A small person like myself would probably not, there wouldn't be as much carbon dioxide released. Cremation also releases mercury, if you have any fillings in your teeth, into the air and the water. And we know that that is a toxic chemical. Okay, so now the environmental impact of natural or green burial. All right, the decomposition of the body, all of the carbon dioxide that would come from a body decomposing is absorbed into the ground, is not omitted. So 0 pounds there. And it actually, and I don't know quite how this works, but it sequesters 25 pounds of CO2. So pulls them out of the environment. Now, if you're transporting the body, especially if I just decided I did want to go to White Eagle, that would would create 189 pounds of carbon dioxide if I was transported there. So that's another consideration. But the carbon footprint is close to 0% for natural burial. Another thing is that land set aside for these natural burial spaces adds to open space, helps wildlife, improves air quality, offsets urban warming. Okay, now I'm looking at the time. So are there any questions at this point that you need to ask or want to ask, or I can just carry on? Yes, Sherry. Thank you. I forgot, you're right. If you could, well, no, it wasn't a question. It was, Sherry was clarifying. It's a great piece of news. I'd forgotten this. My request for Dartford was not denied, it was tabled. So we'll be able to pursue that some more. All right, thanks, Sherry. Yes, Debbie. Yeah, I'll talk more about that. Debbie wanted to know at the green burial sites, do they, are you in a group or are you wrapped and put in a single grave? And it is a single grave. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, good question. She's asking, do they consider a wooden casket? And if you have a wooden casket, sure. But a lot of times there's varnish on them and things like that, which you'll learn when I talk more about natural burials. You can't have anything except it would be wood that had not been treated in any way. Yeah. Good point, Ted.
Composting.
No, I'm going to talk about composting too. Yeah.
Testing. There we go.
It's a really interesting topic. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead then. So as I learned all this information, I became increasingly hopeful that there would be a viable way for me to have a green burial. And in June, a new option became available. Riverside Memorial Park, that's the one, if you're running Bloomsday, it's on the right-hand side, on Government Way on the east side. And that Memorial Park or cemetery was announced they were opening a set-aside section for natural or green burials. They've named the area Forest Grove. And Marty and I have visited it, and we received a lot of helpful information from one of the Memorial Association representatives. I've also walked through it with Kathy Dirks. It was one of our hikes. We do a weekly hike, and that was a small hike that day. There are 200 spaces available there, and I think since that time, like 10 or 15 have been claimed. So let's look at slide number 6. Oh, yes, I wanted to tell you about this. Now, this is, they also have, but they don't talk about it much, they have unendowed burial grounds. When you first come in the road where you would go to this new site, Forest Grove, there's this really very natural little area off to the left, and that is an area they've been burying people there since the late 1800s, I believe. It was once a potter's field, and nothing is done for upkeep. It's just totally wild. In fact, she told me that it's even kind of bumpy up and down because they didn't do the kinds of things. There's no to try to. They put in caskets that would deteriorate and create that depression in the ground. So, but it's kind of charming in a way. So this is a picture, and you can see that cross off the distance. And let's look at slide 7. That's what we were seeing in the distance. I think it says the person died in 1932, but was born in 1856. And you can see there's a few little flowers around there. Let's look at slide 8. Or 7, whatever one comes next. There we go. More around one of the little graves, and irises grow very well in those places. People can plant them. But then this was interesting to me. This is a recent grave that has been put in place since the 2000s, 2008, I think it says, a young woman, and it's in that natural, completely natural area, which is not cared for in any way. But I found that kind of sweet, that's what the people would still want to have a loved one buried there, obviously a very loved young woman. So that's not the one that they're advertising now, but that is available. And I was told there are a few sites left in that one. Okay, so let's look now at Forest Grove. So the next slide. This is the one that they are in the process of creating and now have sites available on. Let's go to the next slide. So you can see they've got these paths that are marked out, and there's sawdust. Everything is natural. Nothing that is placed in this area can be anything other than totally natural or green. And there's an example on the right of what a grave site would look like when it's been, I believe theirs are also hand dug. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about what they require. The burial container must be completely natural so that it can decompose without leaching any non-natural components into the earth. And so, as Debbie was asking, a simple wooden coffin with no varnish would work. In my case, I had always felt that I would want to be buried in a simple cloth shroud, and I'm going to be telling you more about those in a little bit. But you can purchase your cloth shroud through the funeral home, the Memorial Association. But I've been looking, they're much less expensive. If there's all these places online that sell them, or you could make your own. And you can order one, just a simple muslin one, for about $150, all the way up to, I saw pictures of elaborate silken shrouds for $2,000. And I asked, because I'd always thought I'd like to decorate my own. They do permit you to do that, but anything you put on it as decoration has to be totally biodegradable and natural. So I want to show you 2 of the shrouds, kind of what they look like online. So let's go to the next slide. Oops, I forgot this. Okay, thank you. These are the kinds of headstones you can have at Forest Grove. They're basalt. And there are 3 different options. I'm only showing 2 here, but I like the natural look of those for sure. Okay, so now let's go to the next shroud, or the shroud. All right, this is an example of one that can be purchased online. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And here's a way to decorate it with totally natural objects, and they leave an imprint. What she's doing, she's using something that causes them to leave an imprint on the fabric. All right. So over time, it has become apparent to me there are multiple considerations when you're going to make this decision. There is what feels right to the person who is planning the disposition of their own body. We always think of it as a decision for the individual, and the wishes of the individual are almost always honored. But I find it interesting that while it's of great importance to me now, once I'm deceased, which is, of course, when the plan is carried out, it's the survivors for whom it's most important. It's like now, what's happening now, I'm really interested in caring a lot about it, but what about then when it actually takes place? And there's what will the family have to remember them, the person by? And with my mom, she was cremated, and I kept the ashes for a long time trying to decide what to do with them. And so it was good to have them with me. And I think a lot of people who've had a loved one passed, if you have their ashes, then there's ways things you can do that are a true remembrance of that person. And if a person is buried, you don't have that. And so there's that. How will the family remember them? There's also the if you're buried, then there's a place for family and friends to gather and remember you. And so I think that's a fairly significant aspect. There's the cost to the environment, which I've been talking about. And there's the financial cost. The financial cost. All right, so at one point, I was feeling that natural burial at Forest Grove would be my choice. Marty knows this, Kathy knows this. I took her over there, we looked at everything. I was really excited about that there was an option now right here in Spokane available to me. And then I did do some thinking about wow, I'm excited about this. That's interesting, isn't it? To be excited about a burial of your own body. But I think I've kind of given this some thought too to the psychological components that go into this. And I think that part of it is it's just a little piece of control regarding our uncontrollable and inevitable deaths and I think that's another good reason to do prior planning. It can feel like, okay, I am making some choices about this, about the thing I basically can't make any choice about. So anyway, I was excited about Forest Grove. All I needed to do was select the site I wanted. But then I began to think carefully about cost and financial considerations. So let's look at the next slide. Okay, so White Eagle would be $3,000, that's the one down in Goldendale, $3,350 plus transportation. Dartford, Sherry, you know better than I, but they have a very low original cost of only $500 to reserve your site, to have your site, and $150 for the surveying that happens at the time of burial. But then you have to buy, well, the vault right now, because it's not a natural burial ground, and you buy your casket or whatever. And I know Sherry shared with me that they used a funeral director, which is a good idea because they can get the death certificates for you and do a lot of things. So there's a cost for that. So I'm just guessing that it could be around $1,500 to $2,500. And then there's your marker, which is more. Forest Grove is $8,000 to $11,000. So it's pretty much, it's a little less than a traditional burial, but that's pretty steep. The traditional burial is $13,100 at Forest Grove here. Oh, by the way, I learned that prices for all of these things are higher in Eastern Washington than Western Washington. And it's because Marty said, well, maybe more competition over there, but also everything, there's not as many people to be buried or cremated or whatever on this side of the mountain. So they in order to make whatever profit they need to have the prices higher. Cremation in Spokane runs anywhere from $1,800 to $1,600, depending on what else you want to have with it provided by whether they come and pick up the body, all of that sort of thing. So then there's composting, which I guess I didn't put that on the slide, but I'll tell you a little bit more about composting, and I can tell you when we're comparing prices, it's about $5,500. And this is a fairly new thing, and Washington State was the first state in the country to, in 2019, the legislature passed a bill allowing it. And then the first facility opened in 2020. It's called Recompose. And over in the Seattle area right now, there are two of them, Recompose, and I guess I don't have that, didn't keep that information. It's another similar name. And what happens in this process is that the body, and it's done very tastefully. You can go online. I have some handouts that have some of this information on, like the name of the places, and you can Google and look it up. But tasteful, lovely facility. The family can come in if they wish to help lay the body into this big, for want of a better word, vat, which is loaded with sawdust chips, other kinds of things, nothing that is not natural. This also is completely natural process, but that they have this rapid way of composting a body. It takes 30 days. And at the end of that time, it is soil. You have become soil. And they offer, the family can have some of the soil. Maybe you want to use it to help plant a tree in memory of mom or Jayce or whatever. Or some families, many families don't care to have that. And so they take it to another conservation area in Southwest Washington on a hillside where they're reclaiming the land, and they are planting trees, and it's used to, it's really good compost. So it's used to help new life. So I was kind of interested in that, but I'm not sure about that. And I'd really need to get an okay from my family, but I did read about, on their website, people have written about it. And a woman described how her mother was visiting in Seattle from back east and saw an article about this and said, that's great. Her mother had been a very natural lifestyle person all her life. She said, I would like that if I die. Well, while visiting, she had a stroke and she did die. And her daughter was so glad to know her mother would want that. And they went through with that process. And she said, I am so happy for my mom. I know this is what she wanted. And she felt it was really a very positive thing. So there's that as well. And again, the cost for that is about $5,500. Let's see. I did want to say regarding Forest Grove and the cost, it includes death certificates and as many copies as you might need, because you need a lot. The burial site, the opening and closing, the marker, the transport and refrigeration, which might have to happen if you're waiting for family to come, the ongoing stewardship care of the land. And if your spouse has been cremated and you want them in the same grave with you, that's included in this price as well. Now, I want to let you know one other thing that I think is important to know is, and you probably, a lot of you know this, but if you are not using a funeral director, or even if you are, Washington regulations permit you to keep the body at home with you or wherever the person died and you're with them for 24 hours before it has to be moved and refrigerated or buried. And at that time, you can wash, anoint, change the clothing, you can pray over, read to, sing to, sit with them, and have other close people come in. You're with that deceased person for up to 24 hours. And I just really appreciate how this respects the sacredness and intimacy of the act of dying and the needs of the family and caring for the body of a loved one who has died. And this cleaning and preparation of the body, if the family chooses not to do it, of course, is included in the costs of, for instance, at Forest Grove. And there's a wonderful website, and I listed it on the handout, called endoflife.org. And it's so helpful for people who are trying to think through these things, but also it has this checklist. Our friend David Frazier died recently, and his wife Peggy it's amazing what you have to do. And some of you know this, you've lost a loved one recently. The steps you have to go through after someone has died, both for legal reasons, for insurance, everything. So there's a wonderful step-by-step on that. And I think we'll be printing that out. All right, so finally, what I'm sure of right now is I'm not sure what I personally am going to do. And what I do know is I don't want a traditional burial. And this Forest Grove, it's not like we can't afford it. It's that it just seems sort of excessive to me right now. I just really want something simple. And while it is simple in many respects, the price tag is kind of giving me pause. I just want to be laid down in the earth while my soul returns to God. That's what I want. So we were with the Shaws recently, Jim and Sue, and Jim said, well, give me significant points from what you're going to say. And as I was describing this realization I'd had that I wanted to be in the earth, Sue said, oh, that reminds me of a poem I just saw on Facebook. So I'm going to share it with you. It's by Mary Oliver. And then I'm nearly done here. So here's the poem. It's about lying down on the ground and sleeping there one night, but it just really speaks to a lot of what I feel. It's called Sleeping in the Forest. I thought the earth remembered me. She took me back so tenderly, arranging her dark skirts, her pockets full of lichens and seeds. I slept as never before, a stone on the riverbed, nothing between me and the white fire of the stars but my thoughts. And they floated light as moths among the branches of the perfect trees. All night, I heard the small kingdoms breathing around me, the insects and the birds who do their work in the darkness. All night, I rose and fell as if in water, grappling with a luminous doom. By morning, I had vanished at least a dozen times into something better. And I will tell you, I know that I will vanish into something better. And so finally, let's look at the last slide. Yeah, Sue today in the sermon mentioned the leaves. These leaves this year have been so incredible. This is right outside the window where the room where I do my praying and my contemplating and many things. And it so speaks to cherishing life now while we have it, the beauty of these leaves, but also them in the cycle. They are dying, they are falling. And so then I just have this quote, as you see here, from his name didn't get up there very well, so I'll tell you. This is from Rainer Maria Rilke. This is a Rilke line, or from a poem. I live my life in widening circles that reach out across the world. I may not complete this last one, but I give myself to it. So just to remind us all to live fully while we're alive. And that's all I have to say. Any more questions? Uh-oh.
I just wanted, it might be helpful for people to know, like at Forest Grove, all that area that's set aside as natural is divided into individual lots. So you're buying a lot. I think they're like 8 by 16.
It's interesting for that natural burials, the space is much bigger, which was another thing for Dartford to have to consider. They have to be at least 12 by 8, I think, at least. And then down at White Eagle, they're more like 20 by 12. And I don't know why the reason for that.
So you select right now which plot you'd want. And then part of that price includes the basalt, which you may have engraved. And like Jayce said, if we both wanted a natural burial, we'd buy 2 plots next to each other. If she wanted a natural burial and I wanted to be cremated, I can have my cremated remains put in on her space.
And have some of them scattered by your children, like you've thought about doing. Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh.
The composting.
In the
Surely
composting.
yeah, surely they don't turn into dirt in 30
Right.
days.
So Malin's asking what happens to the bone and composting. I'm trying to remember. I think they do deteriorate to some extent. I guess I have to say, I don't know. I know I read what happens, but I'm not remembering. Yeah, I'll look it up and let you know. Debbie.
So if you go with the composting and it's on the west, and it's on the west side,
Yeah.
how do you get your body there?
Oh, that's great question. They will transport you. And they, until November 1st, the cost of that from Spokane is only $500. But as of November 1st, it goes up to $1,000. I guess they just, Marty said, well, that seems like a really big increase, but I think, gas prices have gone up and there's no law that says you can't, in fact, you can keep a body, well, you have to check with the local health officer. You can keep a body at home longer than the 24 hours if you have it with dry ice and packed with cold, and you could probably, you could take it over there yourself if you do all the things that you should do. Well, yeah. Yeah, she's saying she thinks it's illegal. Somebody was talking to me and, I know who it was. It was Gary, was saying he thought that a Subaru is big enough to, with the seats down, you could transport, especially someone my size. You're probably right, Debbie. But those are the kinds of things you want to learn about and make your final plans.
Do you know if it's illegal if you have land to bury a family member?
It is
on your land?
illegal if you have land to bury someone on that land. However, you can apply, there's a process, and you can do what you need to do to make it a little cemetery, but it's $25,000 to actually get that going. And Marty had a great idea. the other night as we were driving and kind of talking about this, he said, well, since this is something I want so much, but I want it simpler, maybe there's a network of people who would like to get together and find some land. People have done that. That's how they did White Eagle, the one down near Goldendale. A group of people who really cared and felt this was important, got the money together, learned the guidelines, and created it. So that's always something possible too. Debbie? That's all right. Me too.
Because this has been very much on my
Mm.
plate to research. So what if you pass away visiting your kids in Utah? And
Okay.
you paid this $10,000 for a green burial? How does your body get transported from there? Because
Okay, so you said, what if I was visiting my kids in Utah and I died there? And I read somewhere that the cost of transporting a body, and this is probably older information, when you die away from home, even internationally, is like $3,000 to $5,000. Yes, Ron,
Neptune.
you
We-
have Neptune.
We
Mhm.
have Neptune, and if we died back in Virginia, if we died back in Virginia, they would cremate us there and ship it.
Okay, thank you, Ron. See, it takes a village to know this stuff. Ron says they have the Neptune Society. And part of that arrangement is if you die away from home, they arrange for you to be cremated at that place and your ashes sent back to wherever you want. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't.
Yes, the question is from Sharon Arnold. I have 2 buried lots at Riverside. It is my understanding that if I and my family would move out of the area, then I could transfer to a lot in another major cemetery. Was anything like this mentioned about these lots that you are discussing?
Okay, so it was, she has already 2 plots at Riverside Memorial, which is the manicured section next to the Forest Grove Natural one. It's her understanding that if they move, if she passes away elsewhere and she wants to be buried in a different place, then what was it?
Can you hear me?
Oh, as long as they're part of the association, they could transfer. Okay. Speak, Sharon, you can talk to us.
Okay, yeah, they, like for instance, if I were to go back to my hometown area in Illinois, and my family were to move also, that they work in connection with each other. So I could then trade my value that I have in that lot to another cemetery. Have they mentioned anything like that with these sites you're talking about?
I guess I just didn't ask the question. I did ask if we bought 2 plots in the natural burial area there, if he changed his mind and decided he wanted to be cremated, would they buy that plot back? And they wouldn't, but it belongs to our family and our family could sell it. So I think there's a lot to know about these things if we really want to pursue and ask. Thanks, Sharon. Hey, Ted.
We get periodic advertisements for pre-planning. And we've thought about planning, let alone pre-planning. I'm just wondering do you know if we were to spend a half hour, an hour with a pre-planning agent, would he have information or she have information on the whole gamut of choices, or would it be somebody working for one of the cemeteries?
I don't know what the pre-planning person would have, but I know the woman at the cemetery, the Riverside Forest Grove, she was very informative and and I've also been emailing with her, and she's given me so much information. And I even said, I'm having second thoughts. I'm not sure I'm going to do it, but she knew I was giving this talk at church, and she was real interested in that. So I think my sense of it is go to the people who are operating whatever option you're looking at and let them tell you, but I don't know. I've never gotten one of those advertisements.
I'll give them your address next time.
I do hear from the Neptune Society on a regular basis. Yeah. It's a business. Okay, looks like we're done with questions. So thank you for staying and being interested in this. I thought maybe it was just a few of us, but I guess we're all interested. And handouts, Barry.
The pedestal on your way out. So
Yeah, and we didn't
Yeah.
make a whole lot because we wanted to be good to the environment, but if there, yes. Oh. Yes, yeah, Marty's just saying, he's my agent. And the rest, he's the rest of my brain. Anyway, he says, he's sure that Jayce, would be open to phone calls or questions from you as you think about that. And that's certainly true. And if there aren't enough handouts, we'll just make some more. Just let Barry or me know. All right. Thank you, everyone.